Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. On the morning after Hurricane Kamala hit 60 Minutes, the wind was so hard that it blew down the set, I think. Boy, she was windy and substance-free. But don't trust me. Trust Akash Chougule, who is with the Americans for Prosperity. He actually knows his way around the economy. They are great sponsors of our program. Americans for Prosperity are at work in every one of the swing states. AmericansForProsperity.org/volunteer. Akash, did you make yourself watch the 60 Minutes interview?
Not start to finish, but I've seen all the clips that you shared and many others to you, and I think it is very clear, as you said, she is woefully unqualified to be president. I think even an unbiased observer would be very concerned at best by what they heard.
You know, she hasn't done a tough interview yet. Bill Whitaker threw her lifeline after lifeline, life preserver, eventually floated out a barge to try and pick her up. But this is my favorite answer for you on the economy, because this makes no sense. He asks about price hikes, and she talks about erroneously lowest unemployment ever. Cut number 7.
Groceries are 25% higher, and people are blaming you and Joe Biden for that. Are they wrong?
We now have historic low unemployment in America among all groups of people. We now have an economy that is thriving by all macroeconomic measures. And to your point, prices are still too high. And I know that, and we need to deal with it, which is why part of my plan, you mentioned groceries. Part of my plan is what we must do to bring down the price of groceries.
Now, Akash, there are two things to cover here. Her plan, in air quotes, but the beginning. Are they wrong? Can we play the beginning again? I'm going to have Akash just answer the question. Let's just play Bill Whitaker asking the question.
Groceries are 25% higher, and people are blaming you and Joe Biden for that. Are they wrong?
Stop. Akash, are they wrong?
They are taking an incomplete view is how I would describe this, Hugh. Yes. Is the unemployment rate very low? Yes. Is that fantastic news for people that have found jobs in recent years? Yes. But I think there's one very, very important thing we have to know. And to be clear, this didn't start with this administration, but it has not gotten any better. And that is people choosing to leave the workforce. Meaning, if you are not actively looking for work, you're not counted in the unemployment line or in the unemployment figure. There are millions and millions of Americans who have literally given up looking for jobs. Those people are not counted in the unemployment rate, and this administration's policies have only exacerbated that problem. They've done nothing to pull people off the sidelines. And in fact, they've pushed for more and more policies that would worsen that problem with all these expansions of welfare and handouts and paying people to sit at home. This is a years-long problem that, as I said, predates this administration, but they've done nothing to make this economy and this workforce more vibrant. And so for them to note that figure, let alone take credit for it, and third, to do so in a question about inflation, I think is just completely absurd.
Well, again, I'm going to play the question because Bill Whitaker, in one of the rare moments when he comes right at her with a very difficult question, it's a direct question. There's no, I mean, it's not about employment. It's not about unemployment. It's not about underemployment. It's not about what Jerome Powell said about migrants taking jobs and adding to the unemployment problem. And no, it's about prices. Can we just Bill Whitaker, cut number 9.
Groceries are 25% higher, and people are blaming you and Joe Biden for that. Are they wrong?
Are they wrong? Prices are 25% higher at the grocery store. People are blaming Biden and Harris. Are they wrong, Akash Chougule, to blame Biden and Harris for those prices?
They are spot on to do so. And it's been encouraging to see the connection the American people have made between public policy and government spending and the price hikes that they face. Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote for two of the biggest spending bills we have ever seen, the American Rescue Plan Act and the quote-unquote Inflation Reduction Act, both of which were massive trillion-dollar stimulus packages that Democrat economists themselves were warning against that created this inflation crisis. This administration, Hugh, as we've discussed, has spent an additional $6 trillion above baseline, coupled with thousands and thousands of pages of regulations that choke off supply chains and labor and entrepreneurship. Of course, that was going to drive up costs. That's exactly what has happened. Prices are up almost 20% since Kamala Harris became vice president. So yes, she is to blame. Are they the only ones to blame? No, but are they primarily at fault? Yes, absolutely. That was a straightforward question from Bill Whitaker that the best she could do was to dodge. That's exactly what she did. But her dodging on a 60 Minutes interview does not change the reality for the American people.
Now, I got to ask you, Akash, where do you think the election is? I had former President Trump on yesterday. I spent most of the time, indeed all of the time, on national security and ran through about 30 questions. And they were pointed questions. Does Israel retaliate? Should they hit the nuclear sites? Things like that. Nothing like that got thrown at her last night. And when it did, she said, I don't do hypotheticals. Do you think anybody is marching off joyfully to vote for Kamala Harris, or are they just being dutifully party people and just going to vote for the D? Because I just don't see any enthusiasm for her.
Well, look, I think, is there some enthusiasm on the Democratic side? Yeah, certainly more enthusiasm than there was for President Biden among Democratic voters, which is reasonable. But I think the same thing is true, Hugh, that we've discussed for months and months and months, which ultimately is that if this election is a referendum on Kamala Harris should lose, and she likely will. But if this election is a referendum on Donald Trump and his personality, Donald Trump could well lose and likely probably deserves to lose, which is why I think it's so incumbent that Trump continues to do interviews like the one he did with you yesterday and continues to hammer home the key messages, which is that the last 4 years have been an abject failure on every discernible measure and every discernible indicator that concerns the American people. The economy is a disaster. Prices are too expensive. They created the border crisis under the Biden-Harris administration. Foreign policy is a mess. Americans are less safe than they were 4 years ago. I think on issue after issue after issue, Trump does have the ability and, of course, has the facts on his side to hold this current administration accountable and make this election a referendum on them. I think the greater consistency with which he can do so over the last month will ensure that this election is not, in fact, about him as the incumbent, but as Kamala Harris as the incumbent vice president.
I want to play you one more clip from the 60 Minutes interview last night, Akash. It's about the border. You mentioned migration. Americans for Prosperity have been very concerned with the border. And then I want to conclude by asking you how AmericansForProsperity.org/volunteer is doing. But this is cut number 9, Bill Whitaker asking Kamala Harris about the border.
I've been covering the border for years. And so I know this is not a problem that started with your administration.
Correct.
But there was an historic flood of undocumented immigrants coming across the border the first 3 years of your administration. As a matter of fact, arrivals quadrupled from the last year of President Trump. Was it a mistake to loosen the immigration policies as much as you did?
It's a long-standing problem. And solutions are at hand. And from day one, literally, we have been offering solutions.
What I was asking was it a mistake to kind of allow that flood to happen in the first place?
I think the policies that we have been proposing are about fixing a problem, not promoting a problem. Okay?
All right,
But
Akash, she won't answer because the answer is obvious. They ought not to have revoked the Remain in Mexico policy. They ought not to have revoked the COVID policies that kept people in Mexico. They ought not to have done it. They did it. There's no answer. Do you think the average viewer understands that?
I do. Again, these are pretty straightforward yes or no questions. And I think these are pointed, good questions. I think Bill Whitaker actually did a good job in this interview for the most part. But again, Hugh, you and I have been around politics for a long time. Even though we're both conservatives, we could message our way around what the Democrats should have said in that scenario, and she still didn't do it. But again, the fact of the matter is, no matter how she weasels her way out of tough questions in an interview, the reality on the ground is the same, which is that the border is a mess because of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. It has made Americans less safe. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need immediate solutions on the border. This administration simply either has no clue how to do so or simply lacks the willingness to do so, which is why Kamala Harris...
I don't think they want to. I don't know why, but I don't think they want to. Let me go to AmericansForProsperity.org/volunteer. Are people signing up, Akash, to work in the swing states, to make calls from outside of the swing states, generally to put their hand up, maybe for the first time ever in their adult lives, at AmericansForProsperity.org/volunteer?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Hugh. I've been around the country all year long. I've been to, many of our state chapters, some that are new, some that have been around for 2 decades. Hugh, the enthusiasm is through the roof. Thousands and thousands of new volunteers because people understand the urgency of what is at stake, not just at the top of the ballot, but down ballot, congressional races, state legislative races, governor's races, what have you. People understand what is at stake because the American people have suffered over the last 4 years. And what AFP is doing is giving them a real outlet to take action and do something about it. But as you and I know, Hugh, Election Day is the beginning, not the end. And that's something, again, that people understand with AFP when they get on board with us, that this is a long fight that starts on Election Day, doesn't finish.
Akash, good to talk to you. Akash Chougule, always a pleasure. Remember, AmericansForProsperity.org.